The explosion never came. Instead, sirens wailed across Terminal C as armed federal agents swarmed Gate 47, their black tactical gear stark against the white marble floors. Passengers screamed, dropped their coffee cups, grabbed their children. Flight 2847 to Miami had been 3 minutes from pushback when the call came in. Now the Boeing 737 sat motionless on the tarmac, its engines silent, while bomb disposal robots rolled toward the landing gear. "This is Agent Martinez with Homeland Security." The voice crackled over the terminal's PA system. "All passengers must evacuate immediately. This is not a drill." Karen Whitfield pressed her back against the baggage services office wall, her heart hammering as she watched the chaos unfold through the reinforced glass window. Her trembling fingers still gripped her cell phone, the 911 operator's questions echoing in her mind. She had done it. She had actually done it. The lie had rolled off her tongue so easily, so convincingly. "I saw him tampering with the engine," she had whispered into the phone 15 minutes earlier, her voice pitched high with manufactured terror. "The black mechanic, Darius Johnson. He planted something. I think it's a bomb." Now the entire concourse was being evacuated, thousands of people streaming toward the exits, their vacation plans and business meetings dissolving into panic. Karen felt a sick satisfaction twist in her stomach. This would teach them all a lesson. This would show them what happened when they threatened her carefully constructed world. Darius Johnson knelt on the hot asphalt beside aircraft 2847, his hands zip-tied behind his back, sweat dripping from his forehead onto the concrete. 3 federal agents surrounded him, their weapons drawn, while a 4th read him his rights. The veteran mechanic's mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. 23 years he had worked for Atlanticorp Airlines. 23 years without so much as a written reprimand. His security clearance was pristine, his record spotless. "Sir, you need to tell us where the device is," Agent Martinez barked, his voice sharp with urgency. "We have over 300 passengers' lives at stake." "There is no device," Darius said, his voice steady, despite the fear clawing at his chest. "I was performing routine maintenance on the hydraulic system. That's all. Check the work orders." The agent's radio squawked with updates from the bomb squad. Negative on visual confirmation. Expanding search to entire aircraft. Above them, the control tower had gone into full lockdown mode. Flight 2847 was just the beginning. Within minutes, Atlanticorp's entire fleet of 47 aircraft would be grounded. The ripple effect was already spreading across the country as air traffic control centers began rerouting flights, canceling connections, stranding passengers in airports from Los Angeles to New York. In the Atlanticorp Operations Center, phones rang incessantly as gate agents tried to manage the growing crisis. Chief Operations Officer Rebecca Santos stood before a wall of monitors displaying flight statuses, all showing the same devastating word, "canceled." The red text seemed to pulse with each passing second, each cancellation representing millions in lost revenue. "How many passengers are we talking about?" Santos asked her deputy, her voice tight with controlled panic. 14,000, ma'am. That's just today's flights. If this goes into tomorrow." The deputy's voice trailed off as he calculated the numbers on his tablet. "We're looking at potential losses exceeding $200 million. Santos closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the crisis settling on her shoulders. Atlanticorp had survived economic downturns, fuel crises, even a pilot strike. But a terrorism allegation, that was different. That was the kind of thing that destroyed airlines overnight. Back on the tarmac, the bomb disposal unit had arrived. Specialists in protective suits began their methodical inspection of Flight 2847, their movements deliberate and cautious. Each component had to be examined, each possibility eliminated. The process would take hours. Darius watched from his position on the ground, his knees aching against the rough concrete. He could see his fellow mechanics being questioned near Hangar 3, their faces confused and frightened. Marcus, who had worked the night shift with him. Jennifer, who always brought homemade cookies for the crew. Good people, honest people, now treated like potential terrorists because someone had pointed a finger at him. Who would do this? He wondered aloud. Agent Martinez crouched down beside him. That's what we're trying to figure out. Mr. Johnson, the caller was very specific about you. Said you had grievances against the airline. Said you'd been talking about getting revenge. Darius shook his head emphatically. That's not true. I love this job. I've got 3 kids in college. I'm 2 years from retirement. Why would I throw that away? The questions hung in the air like the jet fuel fumes that perpetually scented the airport atmosphere. In the distance, news helicopters circled like vultures, their cameras capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, they had all picked up the story within the first hour. Terror Threat Grounds Major Airline scrolled across screens in homes and businesses across America. Karen had moved from the baggage office to the employee break room, where she sat among other off-duty workers, all glued to the television coverage. She forced herself to look shocked, to shake her head in dismay like the others. But inside, she felt a dark satisfaction. The plan was working perfectly. "I can't believe it," said Marcia from customer service, her voice barely above a whisper. "Darius has always been so nice. He helped me jumpstart my car just last week." "You never know what people are really thinking," Karen replied, her voice carefully modulated to sound concerned rather than triumphant. "Some folks are just good at hiding their true nature." But even as she spoke, doubt began to gnaw at her. The scope of the response was larger than she had anticipated. She had expected Darius to be questioned, maybe suspended. She had not expected the entire airline to be shut down. She had not expected federal agents and bomb squads and national news coverage. On the tarmac, the search had expanded beyond Flight 2847. Every Atlanticorp aircraft was now being inspected, their passengers either evacuated or prevented from boarding. The domino effect rippled through the aviation system as other airlines began implementing additional security measures, fearing they might be targets as well. At Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C., a similar scene was unfolding. Atlanticorp Flight 1203 to Charlotte had been taxiing toward the runway when the grounding order came through. 212 passengers were now being evacuated down emergency slides, their luggage left behind as they were processed through additional security screenings. "This is unprecedented," said aviation security expert Dr. Angela Rodriguez during a live CNN interview. "The last time we saw a response this comprehensive was immediately after September 11th. If these allegations prove credible, it could fundamentally change how we approach airline security." The weight of that statement was not lost on Atlanticorp's board of directors, who had convened an emergency meeting via video conference. CEO Jonathan Hartwell sat at the head of the polished conference table in Atlanta, his face haggard with exhaustion despite the early hour. "How solid is the evidence?" he asked Chief Security Officer David Park. Park consulted his notes, his expression grim. The caller was very specific. Said she witnessed the suspect placing an explosive device near the hydraulic systems of Flight 2847. The FBI is treating it as credible until proven otherwise. "And this Darius Johnson, what's his background?" 23-year employee. Perfect attendance record. No disciplinary actions. 2 commendations for safety excellence. His security clearance was renewed just 6 months ago. Park paused, clearly troubled by the contradiction. On paper, he's exactly the kind of employee we want. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. If someone like Darius Johnson could be a terrorist, then anyone could be. The paranoia would spread through the industry like a virus, destroying careers and lives based on nothing more than suspicion. Meanwhile, in a holding cell at the airport police station, Darius sat with his head in his hands, trying to process the nightmare his life had become. His wife, Sarah, had been allowed one brief phone call, her voice shaking with disbelief and fear. "The kids are seeing it on the news," she had whispered. "Michael called from Duke, crying. He can't understand why his father is being called a terrorist. Neither can I." Darius had no answers for her. He could only repeat what he had told the agents: he was innocent. He had done nothing wrong. Someone had made a mistake, or someone had lied. But with each passing hour, as the crisis deepened and the evidence failed to materialize, even he began to doubt whether the truth would be enough to save him. The bomb disposal team had been working for 4 hours when they made the first significant discovery. Hidden beneath the aircraft's belly, wedged between structural supports, was a small electronic device. The team leader, Sergeant Kim Walsh, studied it through her protective visor, her heart rate spiking despite her years of experience. "Command, we have a device. Repeat, we have a device." The radio chatter exploded with activity as word spread through the command structure. Agent Martinez felt a cold satisfaction. The caller had been right. There was a bomb. Darius Johnson was guilty. But Sergeant Walsh was frowning as she examined the device more closely. Something was wrong. The construction was amateurish, almost cartoonish. The wiring was crude. The timer mechanism obviously fake. It looked more like a prop from a movie than a real explosive device. "Command, I need the forensics team out here immediately. This device, it's not what I expected." The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. If the device was fake, then what was the point? Was this an elaborate hoax? A test of security systems? Or something more sinister? Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the FBI's lead forensic specialist, arrived on scene within 30 minutes. She carefully examined the device, taking photographs from every angle, collecting samples from its surface. Her initial findings were disturbing. "The fingerprints on this device don't match your suspect," she informed Agent Martinez. "In fact, they don't match anyone in our database associated with this investigation." Martinez felt his certainty beginning to crumble. Then whose prints are they? Unknown at this time. But I can tell you one thing for certain. Whoever built this wanted it to be found. The placement is too obvious. The construction too crude. This was designed to create panic, not cause actual damage. The implications were staggering. If the device was a fake, planted deliberately to be discovered, then the entire crisis had been manufactured. Someone had orchestrated the shutdown of a major airline, stranded thousands of passengers, and destroyed an innocent man's life. But who and why? Agent Martinez ordered an immediate expansion of the investigation. Every employee who had access to the aircraft would be questioned. Security footage from the past 72 hours would be reviewed frame by frame. The truth would emerge, even if it took weeks. But the truth came much sooner than anyone expected, and from an unlikely source. Karen Whitfield was beginning to panic. The discovery of the device should have sealed Darius Johnson's fate, but instead, it seemed to be raising more questions. She had watched the news coverage with growing alarm as forensics experts questioned the device's authenticity. Her hands shook as she poured coffee in the break room, spilling the dark liquid across the counter. "You okay?" Han asked Marcia, noticing Karen's agitation. "Just nervous about all this," Karen replied, forcing a smile. "Makes you wonder who you can trust. You know." But her composure was cracking. She had built the fake device herself, using components purchased at Radio Shack and techniques learned from YouTube videos. It was never meant to fool forensics experts, only to provide enough evidence to get Darius arrested. The plan had been simple: create a distraction while she completed her final smuggling operation, then disappear before anyone connected her to the contraband. For months, Karen had been supplementing her meager baggage handler salary by smuggling valuable items through airport security: designer handbags, expensive electronics, even small pieces of jewelry. She had developed an intricate network of contacts who paid premium prices for items that bypassed customs and import taxes. The operation had been small-scale and careful, flying under the radar of airport security. But everything had changed 2 weeks ago, when airport management announced new security protocols. Random baggage inspections would be implemented for all employees. Background checks would be expanded. The net was tightening, and Karen knew it was only a matter of time before her operation was discovered. Framing Darius had seemed like the perfect solution. He worked the same shift, had access to the same areas, and most importantly, he had recently filed a grievance about working conditions. Karen had twisted that grievance into evidence of radicalization, creating a narrative that would shift attention away from her own criminal activities. But now, as she watched FBI forensics experts on television discussing fingerprint analysis and device authenticity, she realized her plan was unraveling. Panic began to set in. She needed to get to her locker, retrieve the final shipment of contraband items, and disappear before the investigation turned in her direction. The employee parking garage was nearly empty as Karen hurried toward her car. Most of the day shift had been sent home after the aircraft grounding, leaving the massive concrete structure eerily quiet. Her footsteps echoed off the walls as she fumbled with her keys, her hands still shaking with nervous energy. She didn't notice the unmarked sedan following her at a distance, or the plainclothes agent speaking quietly into his radio. The FBI's review of security footage had moved faster than she anticipated. 3 hours of video analysis had revealed something interesting. Karen Whitfield accessing the maintenance area where Flight 2847 was parked, carrying a small bag, just 6 hours before the bomb threat was called in. Agent Martinez and his team were already waiting at Karen's apartment when she arrived. She pulled into the driveway of her modest duplex to find federal agents loading boxes of evidence into their vehicles. Her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, stood on her front porch, watching the spectacle with undisguised fascination. "Karen Whitfield," Agent Martinez called as she sat frozen in her car. "We need to talk." The interrogation room at the federal building was stark and windowless, lit by harsh fluorescent bulbs that made everyone look pale and sickly. Karen sat across from Agent Martinez and FBI investigator Sarah Chen, her lawyer beside her frantically scribbling notes. "The fingerprints on the device match yours, Ms. Whitfield," Agent Martinez said, sliding a photograph across the metal table. "We also have security footage showing you accessing the aircraft 6 hours before you placed the 911 call." Karen's lawyer, a young public defender named Tom Rodriguez, leaned forward. "My client maintains her innocence. She called 911 because she witnessed suspicious activity. Suspicious activity that she herself was conducting." Agent Chen opened a thick folder and began spreading photographs across the table. "These are images from your apartment, Ms. Whitfield. Hermes handbags, Rolex watches, iPhone prototypes that won't be released for another 6 months. Care to explain how a baggage handler affords this kind of merchandise? The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showed irregular deposits totaling over $300,000 in the past 18 months. Text messages revealed an extensive network of buyers and sellers. Airport security footage documented dozens of instances where Karen had smuggled items through employee checkpoints. "You framed an innocent man to cover your own crimes," Agent Martinez said, his voice cold with disgust. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Thousands of people stranded, hundreds of millions in losses, a man's career destroyed, all so you could continue stealing." Karen finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for it to go this far. I just needed more time." "Time for what?" "To finish the operation. I had one more shipment coming in from Hong Kong. After that, I was going to quit. Move somewhere else. Start over." The confession poured out of her like water through a broken dam. The pressure, the fear, the desperation. It all came flooding out in a rambling narrative that painted her as both victim and perpetrator. She had started small. She explained, just helping friends avoid customs fees. But the money was too good. The risk, too easy to manage. Before long, she was running a sophisticated smuggling operation that generated more income than her legitimate job. Darius Johnson had nothing to do with any of this, Agent Chen asked. Karen shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "He's a good man. He didn't deserve this. I panicked. When they announced the new security measures, I knew they'd catch me eventually. I thought if I could create a big enough distraction, I could slip away unnoticed." The irony was crushing. Her attempt to avoid detection had brought the full weight of federal law enforcement down upon the airport. Instead of hiding in the shadows, she had illuminated every corner of the operation with the harsh light of a terrorism investigation. News of Karen's confession broke on social media before the official announcement. Videos of her being led away in handcuffs went viral within minutes, shared and reshared by users who had followed the story from its explosive beginning. The hashtag Yash Justice for Darius began trending as public opinion shifted dramatically. Atlanticorp's stock price, which had crashed by 40% during the crisis, began recovering almost immediately. CEO Jonathan Hartwell called an emergency press conference, his relief evident as he addressed the media. "We are gratified that the truth has come to light," he said, standing behind a podium emblazoned with the airline's logo. "Darius Johnson is an exemplary employee and an innocent man who has been gravely wronged. Atlanticorp will do everything in our power to make this right." The federal building's press room was packed to capacity when Agent Martinez and U.S. Attorney Patricia Hawkins announced the charges against Karen Whitfield. Television cameras from major networks crowded the front row, their lenses focused on the podium where the law enforcement officials prepared to address the nation. Karen Whitfield has been charged with making false terrorist threats, conspiracy to commit smuggling, customs fraud, and over 200 counts of theft. U.S. Attorney Hawkins announced, if convicted on all charges, she faces up to 45 years in federal prison. The questions from reporters came rapid fire, each one probing different aspects of the case. How long had the smuggling operation been running? Were other employees involved? What safeguards would prevent similar incidents in the future? Agent Martinez fielded most of the questions with professional precision, but his voice carried an edge of personal investment when discussing Darius Johnson's ordeal. Mr. Johnson spent 18 hours in federal custody for a crime he did not commit. Martinez said, his reputation was damaged. his family traumatized, and his faith in the justice system understandably shaken. We owe him more than an apology. We owe him our commitment to ensuring this never happens again. The Atlanta FBI field office had become a hive of activity as agents worked to unravel the full extent of Karen's smuggling network. Dozens of buyers across the country were being contacted and investigated. The scope of the operation was larger than anyone had initially suspected, with connections reaching into luxury markets in New York, Los Angeles, and Miami. Special Agent Linda Foster, who specialized in customs fraud, sat in her cluttered office reviewing financial records that painted a picture of systematic criminal enterprise. Karen had been methodical in her approach, creating false documentation, bribing airport personnel, and developing sophisticated methods for avoiding detection. She wasn't just some opportunistic baggage handler. Foster explained to her supervisor. This was organized crime. She had investors, distribution channels, even insurance to cover losses. It's one of the most elaborate smuggling operations I've seen at the domestic level. The investigation revealed that Karen had recruited at least 6 other airport employees into her network. Customs agents, security personnel, even a TSA supervisor had been taking payments to look the other way, while high-value merchandise was smuggled through their checkpoints. The corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Meanwhile, Darius Johnson was trying to rebuild his life from the wreckage of 18 hours that had nearly destroyed everything he held dear. He sat in his living room, surrounded by family and friends. News crews camped outside his modest suburban home, their satellite trucks creating a media circus on his normally quiet street. His wife Sarah held his hand as they watched the coverage of Karen's arraignment. Their 3 children, Michael, Jessica, and David, sat nearby, still struggling to understand how their father had become the center of a national terrorism scare. "I keep thinking about what might have happened if they hadn't found the truth," Darius said quietly. "What if the investigation had stopped with the fake device? What if they had decided I was guilty anyway?" Sarah squeezed his hand. "But they didn't. The truth came out. That's what matters." But Darius wasn't entirely convinced. He had seen how quickly public opinion could turn, how easily suspicion could destroy a lifetime of honest work. Even now, with his innocence proven and his reputation officially restored, he wondered if things would ever truly return to normal. The answer came sooner than he expected, in the form of an unexpected phone call from Atlanticorp CEO Jonathan Hartwell. "Mr. Johnson, I'd like to meet with you personally," Hartwell said over the phone. "There are some things we need to discuss about your future with the company." The meeting took place in Hartwell's corner office on the 32nd floor of Atlanticorp's headquarters building in downtown Atlanta. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city's skyline, while expensive artwork adorned the walls. It was a far cry from the maintenance hangars, where Darius spent his working days. "Please, sit down," Hartwell said, gesturing toward a leather chair across from his massive desk. "I want to begin by offering you the most sincere apology in my power to give. What happened to you was inexcusable, and the company bears responsibility for not protecting you better." Darius shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had prepared himself for a meeting about returning to work, perhaps with some kind of compensation for his ordeal. He had not expected a personal apology from the CEO of a billion-dollar corporation. "I appreciate that, sir," he replied. "I just want to get back to work, do my job, take care of my family." Hartwell smiled. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. But I have something else in mind. We're creating a new position, Director of Aviation Security and Employee Relations. It would involve working with federal agencies to improve our security protocols, developing training programs to prevent future incidents, and serving as a liaison between management and frontline employees. The offer was staggering: a management position, a substantial salary increase, and the opportunity to help shape policy at the highest levels of the company. It was the kind of career advancement that Darius had never dared to imagine. "Why me?" he asked. "Because you understand what it means to be falsely accused." Hartwell replied, "Because you've experienced the system from the perspective of someone who had everything to lose. And because after 23 years of perfect service, you've earned the right to help us do better." The press conference announcing Darius's promotion took place in Atlanticorp's Employee Training Center, with dozens of his colleagues in attendance. The symbolism was deliberate. This wasn't just a corporate public relations event, but a celebration of the values that made the airline industry work: trust, professionalism, and dedication to safety. Darius stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces: mechanics, pilots, flight attendants, gate agents, all of whom had been touched by the crisis in some way. Many had been questioned by federal agents. Others had seen their flights canceled, their passengers stranded. All had lived through the fear that their workplace might be targeted by terrorists. 2 weeks ago, I was handcuffed on a tarmac, accused of crimes I didn't commit. Darius began, his voice steady but emotional. Today, I stand before you, not as a victim, but as proof that the truth has power, that good people will stand up for what's right, that our system, however imperfect, can still deliver justice. The applause was thunderous, lasting nearly 5 minutes as Darius's colleagues rose to their feet in a sustained ovation. Some wiped away tears. Others called out words of support and encouragement. It was a moment that transcended the usual corporate formality, becoming something more profound: a community healing itself. Karen Whitfield's trial began 3 months later in federal court in Atlanta. The courtroom was packed with media representatives, airport employees, and members of the public who had followed the case since its dramatic beginning. She sat at the defendant's table, looking pale and diminished compared to the confident woman who had once orchestrated an extensive smuggling operation. The prosecution's case was overwhelming: financial records, security footage, phone conversations, text messages. Every aspect of Karen's criminal enterprise was documented in meticulous detail. Witness after witness testified to her methods, her greed, and the devastating impact of her false terrorism accusations. Darius Johnson took the stand on the trial's 4th day, his testimony carrying a weight that went beyond the facts of the case. He spoke about the 18 hours he spent in custody, the fear in his children's eyes when they saw news reports calling their father a terrorist, the long-term damage to his reputation despite his vindication. "She didn't just file a false report," he said, looking directly at Karen across the courtroom. "She tried to destroy my life to cover up her crimes. She was willing to sacrifice me, my family, my career, all so she could continue stealing." Karen's defense attorney tried to portray her as a victim of circumstances, someone who had made poor choices but didn't deserve the harsh punishment that federal prosecutors were seeking. He argued that her actions, while wrong, were driven by financial desperation rather than malicious intent. But the jury wasn't swayed by appeals for leniency. After deliberating for just 6 hours, they returned guilty verdicts on all charges. Karen showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, sitting motionless as her lawyer placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Judge Patricia Morrison scheduled sentencing for 4 weeks later, allowing time for victim impact statements and pre-sentencing reports. When that day arrived, the courtroom was again packed with observers eager to see the conclusion of a case that had captivated the nation. Karen Whitfield, your actions endangered public safety, damaged the aviation industry, and nearly destroyed an innocent man's life," Judge Morrison said, as she prepared to impose sentence. "You exploited your position of trust for personal gain, then compounded your crimes by making false terrorism accusations. The sentence must reflect the seriousness of these offenses and send a clear message that such conduct will not be tolerated." The sentence was 32 years in federal prison, with restitution totaling $12 million to cover the economic losses caused by the airline shutdown. Karen would be eligible for parole in 26 years, making her 68 years old when she might next taste freedom. As the bailiff led Karen away in shackles, Darius Johnson watched from the gallery, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but at what cost? Thousands of people had been traumatized by her actions. An entire industry had been shaken. Trust, once broken, would take years to rebuild. 6 months after the trial's conclusion, Atlanticorp was thriving again. The airline had not only recovered its lost market share, but had actually grown. As passengers appreciated the enhanced security measures and improved employee relations that Darius had helped implement in his new role. He stood in the operations center, watching monitors display flight statuses from across the country. Green text, indicating on time, filled the screens, a stark contrast to the wall of red canceled notifications that had marked the darkest day in the company's history. "Proud of what we've built here," said Rebecca Santos, who had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer after her calm leadership during the crisis. "The new protocols you developed have become the industry standard. Other airlines are copying our approach." Darius smiled, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see aircraft taxiing on the runways below, their passengers trusting that they would arrive safely at their destinations. That trust was sacred. He had learned. It was built through years of consistent service and could be destroyed in minutes by a single malicious act. "We can never let our guard down," he replied. "There will always be people like Karen Whitfield, people willing to exploit the system for personal gain. Our job is to make sure they can't succeed." The reforms that Darius had championed went far beyond security measures. He had pushed for better employee support systems, more transparent reporting procedures, and stronger protections for whistleblowers. The goal was to create an environment where problems could be addressed before they festered into crises. On the first anniversary of the false terrorism accusations, Atlanticorp held a company-wide safety conference. Employees from every division gathered to discuss lessons learned and share ideas for continued improvement. Darius was the keynote speaker, his words carrying the authority of someone who had survived the ultimate test of the system's fairness. "We are stronger today because we faced our worst fears and emerged intact," he told the assembled crowd. "We learned that truth has power, that good people will stand together when tested, and that our commitment to each other is unbreakable." The applause that followed was sustained and genuine, reflecting not just approval, but gratitude. Everyone in that room understood how close they had come to losing everything. They had seen how quickly trust could be shattered and how much work it took to rebuild it. As the conference concluded and employees began returning to their daily duties, Darius found himself back on the tarmac, where the nightmare had begun. The concrete was the same. The aircraft were the same. Even some of the personnel were the same. But everything had changed in ways both subtle and profound. He pulled out his phone and called his wife Sarah, as he did every day when his shift ended. "How was your day?" she asked, the same question she had posed for 24 years of marriage. "Good," he replied, watching a Boeing 737 taxi toward the terminal, its passengers visible through the small windows. "Really good." And for the first time since that terrible morning when federal agents had forced him to his knees on hot asphalt, Darius Johnson meant it completely. The ordeal had tested everything he believed about fairness, justice, and the fundamental decency of people. He had survived with his faith intact, his family stronger, and his purpose clarified. Karen Whitfield remained in federal prison, her appeals exhausted, her smuggling network dismantled, her legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about the dangers of greed and desperation. She would serve as a reminder that actions have consequences, that lies eventually crumble under the weight of truth, and that justice, however delayed, finds its mark. The aviation industry had learned valuable lessons about security, trust, and the importance of protecting innocent employees from false accusations. New protocols were in place, better training was standard, and the bonds between workers had been strengthened by shared adversity. Most importantly, Darius Johnson had proven that ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges could rise above their circumstances and emerge not just intact, but improved. His story became part of Atlanticorp's culture, a reminder that integrity and perseverance were worth defending at any cost. As the sun set over Atlanta's skyline, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, aircraft continued their eternal dance of arrival and departure. Passengers trusted that their pilots were competent, their mechanics were honest, and their safety was paramount. That trust, nearly shattered by one woman's lies, had been restored through the courage of many people who refused to let falsehood triumph over truth. The crisis was over. The healing was complete. And Darius Johnson, once a victim of injustice, had become a symbol of resilience, redemption, and the enduring power of doing what's right, even when the cost seems unbearable. His legacy would outlast Karen's crimes. His example would inspire future generations, and his faith in humanity would remain unshakable. No matter what challenges lay ahead,